Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, Woo crew, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and today I am joined by a fabulous guest. I'm so excited that she's here with me. Carissa Brockman is a Canadian certified counselor, a somatic therapist, a yoga instructor, and clearly, with this list of accolades, she is a lifelong learner. She was born and raised in small town Saskatchewan, but moved to Vancouver Island in 2021, where she now makes her home. She is passionate about supporting others in their healing to encounter their sacred inner child and work with all of their parts in order to journey home to their highest and most embodied version of self, which is music to my ears and a big part of the reason that she's here with me today. So welcome, Carissa. I'm so delighted to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so excited. Like I had just mentioned, I thought, oh, it'll be so beautiful for us to connect and get to talk about these things that we're so mutually passionate about, and might as well record it while we're in the process. So this works beautifully.
Exactly. Yeah, it was synchronicity that brought us together. I always feel like
Yeah.
there's magic there when we pay attention, always. So I'd love if we could start today by chatting a little bit about you and your journey and what brought you to this work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like I see it like kind of like as a two-part story, because the first part was being the one of my friends that people would come to with their problems, and kind of that natural, like, oh, maybe you should be a counselor one day. And I pushed back on that for a long time. And then I started doing a lot more mentorship and leadership style roles, or working with youth and young adults in basically informal counseling positions. And a lot of the time in those conversations I'd be having with them, we would get to a point where, we'd encounter some trauma, or we'd encounter some of the story that I knew I wasn't qualified to carry them through in that sense.
Mm.
And I had kind of been told that in my work of like, okay, here's your scope of practice, and then you need to refer out. And
Mhm.
I felt, because any type of therapeutic healing work is relational, that's really kind of like the basis and foundation of it, beyond the qualifications. And
Mhm.
it was difficult for me to feel like I was rupturing these relationships by, we're building, we're opening, and then it's like, okay, now I got to send you out here. I'm not allowed to go
Mhm.
with you beyond this point. And so I kind of finally got to this space of going, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go get the letters behind my name, and that's kind of what I saw it as. And then part two of that is that in the process of doing my master's, because it was all of this mindset of I'm going to just be able to help people, I was in a very abusive relationship, and I fascinatingly didn't know that I was in an
Mhm.
abusive relationship, even though I was studying it. I was studying in my master's how to help people out of these situations,
Yeah.
and um, and so it was actually a coworker's story of her own experience that really awakened me to what I was living through and coming out of it. And so I finished my master's in counseling, but um, as I was moving through it, I was on my own healing journey. So I was like learning how to help people, but while really walking my own path of recovery. And what I found was that while there was a place at the beginning that I really did need some cognitive level help of just kind of processing what had happened, the deeper healing work was what drew me to my yoga mat, was like getting into my
Mhm.
body and learning how to start to breathe again. it was bringing me to different, energy healers and different spaces where I was encountering parts of me that, why am I doing a hip opener and I'm starting to cry? How come when I'm in the fetal position, my body starts to shake? And so that drew me into this world of somatics. And that's where, I pursued my yoga teacher training and then got into somatic experiencing and internal family systems and this whole world of parts work and inner child healing. And so I was learning how to help people in this kind of mainstream cognitive side of things, but I was doing my own healing journey over here in this really holistic, non-pathological, bottom-up approach. And so that's why it became this, okay, here's the journey I've walked. And so I want to support people in this way too. So I do have the letters behind my name, which is great for insurance. and there's still, and I don't want to invalidate talk because it's powerful when we have that opportunity to be heard, to be witnessed, to be able to speak our truth, to have that reflected back to us and validated. But then there's also, like, if we want to kind of transform the patterns and heal the deeper wounds, this space to go deeper into. And so that's kind of the part two of what really drew me into this side of the work and what I really have this passion of doing and connecting with clients that I do work with now. So that's the version of it.
I love that. And I think you touch or speak to something that is a fairly almost common experience among healers. Anybody who kind of, I would consider you a healer if you're working in somatics and therapy. The combination of those things is healing for people, or it helps them on their healing path. And I think so many of us who find ourselves in this work have some experience that really rocked us or shook us as we grew and healed. And it's this deep sense of almost responsibility to pass on that wisdom that we gained and to be able to help show that path to those who are a few steps behind us almost.
Yeah, and I think in that too, one of the reasons that we're not only drawn to it, but able to support others in that walk is because you can only take people as far as you've gone in yourself.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's why there's kind of this part one, part two. Prior, I really was only able to touch the surface of the work I was doing, even with the youth and the students I was interacting with, because I had really only touched the surface of my own healing journey, of my own self, of my own parts. And then once I got, sometimes life does that, it breaks you. And you find yourself flat on your face. And then it's that walking through it that really does enable you to connect to someone else in their own dark night of the soul. Because what I find, there's this energetic exchange that happens in that healing space where we can kind of pick up on whether or not this person has been there, and we've never been in the exact scenario of anyone else, where it is all unique. And yet there are these energetic similarities of, like, I can feel that, and I can remember being in that, despair, in that pain, in that fear, in that space. And I've journeyed through it. And when we can connect with that, we really feel a lot safer to be supported in that process by the person in front of us. So I think that it's very much, not coincidence that so many of us in this field have our own stories of those crashes and those burns.
Yeah, and to some extent, every human does, and not everybody finds that path out of it, or a path that leads to a life that is maybe more fulfilled or more joyful on the other side. There's that kind of nuance there of, like, okay, I survived and I coped and life went on. And then there's the humans who grow and learn from the experience and actually come out on the other side, as much as it's not to silver lining the experience, because that's not at all the case. I don't believe things happen for a reason necessarily. I think bad things happen to good people all the time because life is life. But there are people who come out on the other side, and once they are able to start doing that healing work, get to choose how to move forward from it, I guess, if they're lucky enough, or if they've had the tools or the support networks. And so the people who have done that often, in my experience, end up being like, wait a minute, I learned something. I really need to share this. How can I help?
Yeah.
And that could that could be as like an
Yeah.
author, or and I know you're writing a
Yeah.
book. That's how we met, is that we're in a book writing
Mhm.
mastermind together. It could be as an
Yeah.
author, it could be as a speaker, it could be as a counselor, a healer, it could be as a teacher or like a sports coach. It could, there's so many
Yeah.
different places that this kind of learned, lived experience and healing can ripple out from the people who've experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting because we sometimes compartmentalize the spaces that we're supposed to be allowed to heal in, or
Mhm. Yeah.
whereas just kind of like all of the different ways that you mentioned, a lot of people, and I do feel for hairdressers because I do think that they're sometimes burdened with the role of being, and
Yes.
many of the other, any other helping modalities too, where there's any type of relational. I've even witnessed, in the grocery store that the clerk that's saying, "How's your day going?" suddenly receives, and
Right.
and we look for these spaces for healing all over the place. But I think it also kind of lets us all know that we do have this drop in the pond that does have this ripple effect, that we can be part of this healing journey, that even just each individual walking their own healing path is
Mhm.
impacting others too, right? It is inspiring, it is supporting, it is in all these different ways, whether we identify as my job is in the healing profession, or I'm just a human on this healing journey, and that in itself is creating this ripple effect.
Mhm.
um, because you're right, as humans we all have those fall in our face experiences that
Yeah.
we're working through, learning through, growing through, and if we're lucky enough able to kind of have this opportunity that comes through the other side.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you and I were talking in our DMs on Instagram about this internal family systems idea or work. And when you said the name to me, I was like, oh, I think I've read about that somewhere once, but I think I stumbled upon the idea of it kind of by happenstance. I may have read about it somewhere, but I really starting to work with the parts of self that we end up meeting as we start to uncover and unpack some of this work. And I know that that's an area that you really like to spend time with your clients and in your own healing journey as well. How did you stumble
Yeah.
upon this work or find it or yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was it was actually while I was in my practicum that somebody else's client had said they wanted help with internal family systems. And initially I had heard that and I thought, oh, that sounds very structural and very cognitive, and I didn't get it. Internal family systems to me sounded like, oh, that's not really the world I'm in. And then when I looked into it and I realized, oh, it's this understanding that the same way kind of like they work in family systems to understand the way that each part of the family interacts and influences the other, so too do we have all of these parts inside of us that are interacting all the time. And it can seem a little bit abstract, it could seem even woo
Yeah.
to think about, right, interacting with all these parts of us, and yet it's the most intuitive way of being, because we have this language all the time, right? If I say, hey, do you want to grab dinner later today? Ah, yeah, part of me really does, and like part of me just wants to stay home in my pajamas this evening. Like we talk parts language constantly. Part of me is really excited about this thing that's coming up, and part of me is totally terrified about it. And so when I started understanding this and then being able to interact with these parts of myself, that's when it became this whole new understanding. Oh, maybe my anxiety isn't my asshole inner critic, right? Maybe my anxiety is actually this like young part of me that's terrified of being seen or heard, or
Mhm.
really believes that her worth comes from the perception of others, right? Like she
Mhm.
even acted up. There's this part of me that acted up before even coming on this podcast. I'm going, oh, are we ready to be seen? Are we ready to be heard? Are we ready to, let these parts of us start speaking? And and now that I've been working with these parts of myself, I can recognize when that gets activated. But before, it just used to overtake me, and
Yeah.
it just would completely suffocate and drown me out. And we villainize those things. We think, oh, I need to like defeat my anxiety, versus this compassionate understanding. And so I think too, the deeper part of this work of inner child healing, somatic work, internal family systems, parts interaction, is what we're tapping into is this deeper sense of self, this kind of innate healing capacity, and this deeper wisdom of self.
Mhm.
And So when I'm working with others, when I've done this in myself and when I'm working with others, it's this like guiding people to not only interact with the parts, but to get to know them from the viewpoint of this deeper, like the constantly existing part of self, like this real true self, this whether you want to call it higher self,
Mm-hmm.
soul, spirit, whatever you want to connect to. But that as soon as you tap into that and then you witness what all these other narratives and programs and beliefs and feelings that you've taken on, it's almost like just sitting back and just watching as someone is able to unfold
Yeah.
and release in all these ways. It's like I'm not doing the healing, but I'm supporting, guiding somebody into reconnection with that true self. And then when they touch into it, it's like you just get to sit back and witness this incredible healing
Yeah.
start to unfold. And that to me is the most powerful experience.
It really is. It's the most incredible thing to watch. I have been intuitively moving in this direction with some of my clients, and initially it's like there's two parts of me, and then it's like, oh no, wait, there's another part and another, and it's like more and more parts keep showing up to the table, and it
Yeah.
starts to allow for, more breadth of expression, the ability to feel all of those feelings that were maybe really shoved away or repressed. And I think it's really important too, what you touched on there, that ability to understand and hold compassion for why those parts exist, right? That anxiety is not there because it's an asshole. That anxiety is
Mm-hmm.
there because that was something that allowed you to survive or cope through some sort of situation when you were a child, whether it was a perceived threat or a real threat. That we have
Mm-hmm.
all of these parts of ourselves that are adaptations to lived experience. And sometimes they're adaptations to lived experience in past lives. I believe we are woo curious here. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you're coming in with
Yeah.
these kind of threads that maybe you're reenacting for your ancestors as well. But it's definitely
Mm-hmm.
so powerful to be able to say, I see you. Thank you for protecting
Yeah.
me. I'm okay if you let go now, or whatever it is. That dialogue is the first step rather than, as you said, just like pushing it down or being like, please go away. I hate you. I like, why can you not? Why can't you just stop existing? It just
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
work.
No, exactly. And I think what you're touching on too, just even, mentioning past lives and this, but this idea too of like these epigenetics and this intergenerational trauma and just the
Mhm.
greater, wider parts, because a lot of times we get so hard on ourselves. Why am I like this? And it
Mhm.
feels so personal, and I'm just so against myself. And why am I like this? And maybe one of the things I used to say to myself, and I've heard clients say too, is like, well, I didn't have it that bad. I shouldn't be struggling because blah, blah, blah. When we're not witnessing all of the ways in which we might be carrying, holding, and burdened with generational beliefs in our family line, cultural dynamics, whether it's past lives or previous generational experiences or whatever
Mhm.
that might be, that's also in there. What have I internalized,
Yeah.
from such an early age? So often we just think, oh, this is just who I am. It's how I've always been, because we enmeshed with some of these beliefs from as early on as we can, pre-verbal memory. It was
Yeah.
just this,
When we were just
this
little
is what it
sponges.
oh,
Like
exactly.
little sponges in
Absolutely.
hypnotic state. Like we
Yeah.
know
Yeah,
about
just the
brain
most
waves.
susceptible. Yeah.
Yeah, so susceptible up to it was it age 7 or something where we're finally not in
Yeah.
that like hypnotic brainwave state where we're so suggestible, and we're that way for a reason so that we can learn all the things that will
Yeah.
keep us alive in life and language and all of that. But we don't just pick up the good things. We definitely pick up
That's
all sorts
right.
of crap as well.
Yeah. And also like redefining this idea of what is trauma, because, and
Mhm.
this is, Gabor Mate and Peter Levine and all these other incredible leaders in the field of going, trauma is not what happened to you. It's what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you.
Mhm.
And that's really powerful paradigm shift, because if I think trauma is what happened to me, then I kind of rate, what is considered explicitly traumatic. So it's like,
Mhm.
well, and then I start comparing my trauma to other people's trauma, or maybe areas of the world that other people are living in that I would consider traumatic, and I go, well, I was really in a very safe environment in comparison or something like that. And the reality is it's actually about what happened inside of us, meaning what did this make me believe about myself? How did I internalize this? What did this make me feel? What did this make me believe about the world and others? And the beautiful piece is that, like, if trauma was the event that happened, well, then you can't do anything about it, right?
Right.
Then, yeah, there's no point in going into the healing journey because you can't change it. And
Right.
that's what I hear a lot of people going, like, why would I want to go back and open up that wound? I can't change it. It already happened. But if we see trauma as the impact inside of us as to what that made us take on, believe, and how that impacted us in here, well, we can change that. We can heal that. We can go in and witness that. We can transmute and resolve that. And so now suddenly there's purpose in
Mhm.
going into those spaces. And that's really such an important shift, I think. And I see that as these body-based STEMs, more intuitive and younger inner child experiential therapeutics that go in and encounter how did
Mhm.
that impact you? Because then you kind of pull the thread. You go, oh, okay, from, and I'll speak for myself here, right? From really early on, I really took on the role that I'm the caregiver, right? I was the oldest sibling, and so I'm supposed to look out for everybody and take care of everybody. And so
Mhm.
now suddenly that that made me believe that that was where my worth came from.
Yeah.
And so now I'm throughout life, and there's this thread. So maybe it happened from the time I was 4 years old that I, just believed that that was where my worth came from. But now suddenly
Mhm.
it starts to impact the relationships that I'm choosing in my life, right? The dynamics that I'm playing with my friends. Now suddenly I'm not calling in partnerships that are reciprocal, mutual, where I can have my needs met and I'm supported, but rather I'm finding people that I feel need me because I think my
Yeah.
worth comes from being needed, from being the caregiver, right? And ooh, that really got ugly pretty quick. You can kind of see it. So it's like maybe we wouldn't have seen that as traumatic. And yet,
Yeah.
if I internalize something really deeply about my own identity from this space of life, it can actually impact until I go back and I encounter that part and I go, oh no, that wasn't where you're, like, you were just worthy as you were.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to care for others, but you don't need to do that to be worthy of love, of acceptance, of support, of these pieces. And so then suddenly we start looking at what healing can be and what we're allowed to heal from in kind
Yeah.
of like a different lens. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such an important piece, that worthiness piece, because it is such a common experience of so many people. And I speak to women primarily because that's who I work with primarily and who is listening to this podcast, if the statistics are to be believed. Um, I think that a lot of women find their worth in being needed by others because we are also raised to believe that that is what a good girl or a good woman is, right? They are selfless. They are taking care of everybody else's needs ahead of their own. They are not complaining. They're like all of these pieces. And it's
Yeah.
really hard to disengage yourself from them. The awareness of where they came from and why they're there, and then pulling that thread
Mhm.
is like that first step of unraveling. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was a
exactly.
I was just a little girl, and yet I find a lot of similarities between your story and mine. I'm also always been that caregiver kind of manager
Mhm.
type. I don't like make sure everybody's okay. And also was in what I had no idea was an abusive relationship until after I left, actually, that I finally
Yeah.
identified it as such. I just knew I was not happy and I needed to get out. Took me 5 years from
Mhm.
knowing that to actually leave. And
Yeah.
it was in the like years after that that it was just became so much more obvious that, oh yeah, no, that was abuse. And
Yeah.
the number of women who are in relationships with others, but without being in relationship with themselves, so they can't
Yeah.
see those kinds of patterns unfolding or that kind of toxicity or that kind of abusive behavior because they feel like they're just playing out the role of being good, of being what society told them to be.
And isn't that, and I'm sorry to hear that that's been your experience. And I think that it's so beautiful that to witness you now, right? Being such a light, being such a caregiver, being such a support, being willing to even talk about those things, because it's hard. We get met with all sorts of shame and confusion when we come out and we start to, like I see a relationship that is abusive as being this kind of earthquake that really just brings everything tumbling down. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's this process after that I refer to as like the aftershocks of when you start to realize that you were in an abusive relationship, and that in and of itself will knock you out. Like
Yeah.
that process there is so confusing, is so, it has its own rattling component to go through. And then there's like that again, like you said, that untangling of going, okay, so what were the parts of me in here that kind of believed that somehow I was supposed to be in this role, or that this was,
Mm-hmm.
the elements of me that the narratives and beliefs I had that kind of allowed me to stay, which again, it's difficult because suddenly we think, oh no, if there's a part of me that somehow allowed some of this, it means it justifies it, or it excuses it, or it means I'm responsible for it. Well, no, like, it doesn't excuse, it doesn't mean anything that was ever done was okay. It's just to be able to heal the parts that thought we have to accept some
Yeah.
element of
Or
it.
that like this is normal. There was
Yeah,
that sense of like this
totally.
is normal.
Yes.
And for any just I don't think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but there may be listeners who know my ex, and he was not physically abusive. So I want to
Oh,
tell people that, but it doesn't, yeah, it is that sense of being like, this is normal. This is, oh, I should be able to handle this. I'm strong enough to stay here. From the outside, this
mhm.
looks so perfect. Like, what am I complaining about? Again, that kind of sense of,
Yeah,
I don't, what's so wrong? What do I have to complain about? Feeling like life
yeah,
is pretty good. I have, the house and the marriage and the job and the like all of this
yeah.
external kind of markers of success. And yet that sense that something is deeply wrong. And for me, I was so disconnected from my body, and I'd love to take us in that direction and go deeper there,
Mm.
that I was experiencing heartburn to the point where I was medicated, like prescription medication daily for this heartburn that started a few
Mhm.
years before I left. And I remember my mother telling me one day that she only got heartburn when she was stressed. And I was like, I'm not stressed. I mean, I'm a on-call midwife and I'm in a relationship I don't want to be in, but I'm not stressed. And it was amazing to me the amount of disconnect there that I couldn't even admit to anybody that that could possibly be what was going on. And I ran out of my medication the week I left, and I have not had heartburn more than just like mildly a couple of times since then.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? And this is where the wisdom of the body really starts to come in, because our body will let us know that something is not well long before we consciously tune into it. Like, it's,
Hmm.
if you're ever curious, if you're stressed, just check, like, where are my shoulders? What is my breathing rate like? Am I noticing I'm really stiff and sore and tense lately? Like, it is held in the body in so many ways. And it's fascinating because we don't, and how's my digestion, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, that's a really good one, because that's the first thing that goes offline. If our body perceives that we're under some element of threat, we go into our fight and flight. And so what happens is, the more unresolved traumatic experiences that we have, again, considering trauma as the impact it had on us, rather than having to think of, listing overt traumatic experiences, but rather, how many times in my life did I feel that there was a threat to my sense of safety, well-being, worth, identity, whatever that might be. And if I wasn't able to fight that off, if I wasn't able to run away from it, then I had to go into my third defense, which is freeze,
Hmm.
right? And that means now I've trapped it, now I've held it, now I've stored it. And that,
Hmm.
where do I store it? I store it in my body. My body says, okay, I'll hold it. And so what happens is, eventually in time, the body starts screaming at us saying, hey, I don't want to hold this anymore. And so we start
Yeah.
to notice that, like, our neck is just unrelenting, with like stiffness and soreness, or our digestive tract is just giving us all sorts of issues, and we're not getting any answers other than IBS, or
Yeah.
take some Tums, or whatever that might be. And so it's fascinating going into, because the process that I do when working with people is to really start in the body. is to really go, okay, there's these events going on, or there's this pattern, or there's this situation. Let's just tune into how do you feel when you connect to that? And very quickly that we start to translate the language of the body. Okay, well, my chest starts to tighten and my stomach feels like it's a knot. And it's, you can follow the thread of the body to start tapping into where is it being held and stored. And that translation I find to be really important and powerful, because like you said, we disconnect, and dissociating is part of our survival mechanism. I have been very dissociated from it. I'm still working through reconnecting to many parts of my body where I have experienced, traumatic dissociation from. But starting to learn the language of, so that then when these symptoms show up, we can tune and go, I know what you're telling me. Okay,
Yeah.
I know that this is the part of me getting activated, because the last time I really tuned into the knots in my stomach, it reminded me of being 6 years old and being in this environment when this happened, and I was made to feel this way, and now that's getting, so
Yeah.
it's very much connected in ways that we go, I would have had no idea that my shoulders up here were really, from 30 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's that, oh, I love the this sense of reconnection. There is a sense of creating that safe place in your body again, because that dissociation often comes from not feeling safe in our bodies, in our lived experiences. And so we stop knowing how to listen to those subtle cues that our body gives, and until those subtle cues become very, very loud screams. And even then, we often can't follow that thread back. So I love that piece of starting there. It's similar to starting to connect back into intuition, right? Is that needing to come home to that body, to get to know it again, to listen to it, and to believe it. I often will say, let yourself be right when you're starting to do this work, when you're starting to, whether it be in relation to woo curiosity and and magic in this world, or if it's in relation to
Yeah,
some of the deeper healing work that I do with clients, just like what happens if you just let yourself be right instead
yeah,
of making yourself wrong?
absolutely. And instead of making yourself wrong, because that's part of the narrative that we've totally internalized a lot, especially if we have maybe history of relational abuse and the psychological warfare that goes with that.
Mhm.
But it's interesting too, this kind of like woo curiosity piece. What I find is that is just the natural byproduct of going deep within. Like
Yeah.
it's like when you start doing this work, and now I'm connecting to my inner child. Well, I'm I'm doing quantum healing here. Like
Yeah.
like we're
Yeah.
just by nature of even, and I've done this with so many people where they would never think about the idea of inner child healing. That sounds way too fluffy and whatever.
Hmm.
But naturally, there are these parts that show up. And then when you really think about that, okay, I am able to connect to that young child because they exist in this quantum space because I was the one that experienced that, and therefore I can still access that.
Yeah.
Meaning, meaning there's this kind of time space continuum change that's happening here, and we're going into this like subconscious reprogramming realm
Hmm.
where we're getting into that below the surface of the iceberg understanding of what's really driving my life, my patterns, my relationships, all of my experiences. It's not coincidence that you and I took on young childhood beliefs that we were the caregiver, and now we're both two healing workers. Okay, like
Yeah.
this is not coincidence how we ended up here. But this is
No.
something that I wanted to say too, of like, it doesn't, because sometimes what I've been asked is people, well, I don't want to change that part of me that, you know, feels like I have to be super productive because that's how I succeed in my business. Like that works really well for me on some levels, right? Just like being
Hmm.
a caregiver is great. It's really good. Why would I not want to be that? And what I see it as, it's not about changing those parts, but giving back the autonomy to choose. Because when
Yes.
we believe that our worth comes from those roles that we play, now I need to.
Hmm.
Now at the detriment of my own well-being, I have to. Because if I don't, it threatens my very sense of self. It threatens my identity. It threatens my worth. And so that's the part, because what we want to do is say, absolutely, you can still be a caregiver. Absolutely, you can still be a highly productive CEO and, super organized and functional and all these different types of things. But what we want to reestablish is this autonomy that you can choose, because it also
Yes.
means that in those moments when it's not safe, it's not healthy, it's not okay to do those things, you have access to the choice that says no. Because now I can say no without it threatening my very sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not
Yeah.
to villainize these roles we took on, because sometimes they're very beautiful. But it's like for you and I, for instance, now we're in this healing field and we can see what kind of like led us here. And yet, as we do this healing work in ourselves, we have more and more capacity to choose, to create boundaries around, to know that, whether or not we're interacting in these spaces isn't determining our worth, isn't determining our value.
Yeah.
So now we can choose to be in these spaces from just deep desire in the heart to help others,
Yeah.
find that too. So that I find is a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ability to choose and to create space around those decisions to be able to even see, oh, is that something I really want to be pursuing? Because so many of us are just caught up in the
Mm-hmm.
swirl of capitalism, the patriarchy. My previous co-host, her signature hashtag is FTP, which is fuck the patriarchy. So but it is this sense of, it's so easy to get caught up going
Yeah.
after the goals and the dreams that we think we want, but we've never paused to assess if they are actually what we want, if they are actually what will make us feel fulfilled or our
Mm-hmm.
our definition of success. And so giving
Mm-hmm.
ourselves that ability to pause, to assess,
Mm-hmm.
and then to say, oh yeah, no, that is what I want. I'm going to consciously choose to go that way versus
Yeah.
just letting life kind of rush by and be like, whatever, I'll think about it. I'll worry about it when I have time. When I
Yeah.
have time.
Well, I think this is why there's like a lot of spiritual leaders of every religion and denomination and practice that talk about, like, we don't come to our spiritual awakening except through breakdown. Like it's
Yeah.
and one of the reasons I think for this is I kind of liken it to the idea of an apple cart, of like we work so hard to hold all those apples together. Like if our life is a bunch of apples piled in an apple cart, all of our energy is going towards keeping those all together. And from a young age, we put on, okay, I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to be like this, life is supposed to look like this is who my partner's supposed to be, this is what my job's supposed to be, this is, and I'm just going to work so hard to hold this all together, that there's not even a first second do I think that I just want to be like, oh, F it, and just like dump it out and try something new. Like that's the most
Yeah.
threatening thing in the world. So I'm going to like just about the cost of my life, try to hold this together. And that's what I was doing, right? When I look at
Yeah.
like what led to the relationship I ended up in and the crash I had after, the beauty that came through that brokenness was realizing that part of my desire to cling on and hold on to that relationship was because partly I had chosen a relationship that I thought resembled who I was supposed to be with and what life was supposed to look like and all of these things that I thought I was supposed to be.
Yep.
And I needed that cart to hit the wall and for everything to fall apart, because I wasn't doing it on my own.
Mhm.
I wasn't upturning the apple cart on my own. Sometimes the reason we become grateful for the breakdowns and for those moments is because the pause that is provided to go, do I want to pick those apples back up? Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of in there that look actually pretty rotten. Like maybe I was trying to hold together a cart that wasn't even mine, that was just like told to me, that was put on me, that I just like believed I was supposed to be an apple, and maybe I'm like an orange, like, or maybe I'm a whole fruit basket. Like it just, we cling so desperately to this kind of illusion of control,
Yes.
uh, to the point where sometimes we do get to the point of a crash so that we have this chance to kind of redefine it and choose that
Yeah.
power of choice.
Yeah. As you were speaking, I was thinking about when we opened this talk, somewhere near the beginning, you said something about that comparison of my trauma to yours. And, I
Yeah.
haven't had anything too traumatic in my life. And I often have that narrative myself because I feel like I've had, and I know I have, I'm a white woman who grew up not wealthy, but definitely not. And so I have a lot of privilege. And as you were just speaking now, that sense of when was my spiritual awakening? Because I was an atheist for a long time. Now to go from professing to be an atheist or like agnostic, maybe, to calling myself openly as a witch is a huge shift in not very many years. And it was kind of twofold for me. It was leaving that relationship, although it felt only positive in the moment because I chose to leave and I felt a massive relief immediately. It took me a long time to start unpacking some of the layers that I had accumulated there. And then my second phase was deciding to leave my career as a midwife, which was a bit more of a crash and burn, like, oh, shoot, I discovered too many things and now I can't unsee them and now I can't unknow them. And now I need to kind of jump ship from this career that I thought would be a much, much longer road than it was. I practiced for 6 years. But it just that reevaluation of what it is that is important and that that saying we only get this one life that we know of. We might get more, but we don't remember. This is the one we have now that we know we have, that we remember. And Mary Oliver Elwood says it best. She says everything best, but that point line from her poem Wild Geese, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think that that line evokes the courage that it takes to decide to start delving into some of this work because it's not comfortable and it's not easy. And it's so worth it. But you don't really know that or believe it until you're on the other side, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so courageous, right? If we knew that on the other side is all the magic, then it wouldn't feel as freaking hard and scary. Because the reality is the magic is there waiting, right? That as we go on this healing journey, we're just expanding and expanding and expanding, and our capacity to experience, synchronicity and magic and joy and all of the love and intensity of life. We expand. That's the kind of this experience. But so we'd run into the healing journey with excitement if we really understood that, but we don't. All we know is that right now I'm in pain. Right now it's dark. Right now it hurts. Right now it's hard to get out of bed or put one foot in front of the other. Right now I can't even imagine what it would feel like to not feel this way. But there's something in me that's saying it's worth taking this next step, leaning towards. Like I just see anytime somebody comes to me, I just feel so humbled and honored because it's like they are making such a courageous choice to lean towards when everything in us is trying to pull us away from the discomfort, the pain, the everything, right? It's this choice to lean towards it. And it's like you got to feel it to heal it, and that sucks. But it does bring you through the other side. And so it's, if I really hadn't walked this myself, and I'm still, I mean, we're all still on the journey, we're all just walking each other home here, but if I hadn't really kind of experienced what it's like to have those moments of coming through it, then I'd feel really overwhelmed and super depressed by the work I do, because it would just feel like, oh my God, I just have to hold all of this pain and suffering and there's nothing that can change it, right? But I actually instead see it as this really sacred opportunity where there is this chance, now that the apple cart has crashed and fallen apart, there's suddenly this new opportunity that presents where we can really start releasing and letting go of things that are no longer serving, that are no longer coming with us on that next phase, and walk into, that beautiful. I'm walking it in myself, and I've witnessed it time and time again with others on that journey, and it is so powerful and beautiful. And that's, I think, what gives us the courage and the resilience to keep doing this work too, because otherwise it would just be super depressing. It would just be super heavy and hard. It would just be like,
what do I do with all of this?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and for anybody listening who is feeling drawn to you and to your work, how do they walk that path with you? How do they work with you? What do you offer?
So I do one-on-one sessions over Zoom. So I'm registered Canada-wide. And because I'm registered Canada-wide, most insurance plans, because I got the letters.
Yay!
I did that part. Expensive letters.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I do one-on-one client work over Zoom. So I do free discovery calls to just meet and greet and get to know if this feels like a good fit. And so my website is www.carissabrockman.com. And then I also on my website share resources or speaking opportunities, social media. On Instagram, I'm at somatically embodied. And I'm just kind of sharing my journey there and other things that I've learned along the way that hopefully can be helpful for people. So yeah, those are some ways to connect for sure.
Wonderful. And all of these details will, of course, be in the show notes for the listeners to be able to access. And I definitely recommend you go follow Carissa on Instagram. Her content is wonderful. Thank you so, so much for being my guest today. It was such a pleasure to have you on. Are there
Thank you.
any?
I just really appreciate it. I was really excited for us to get this chance to talk. There's kind of something that happens. This is part of the synchronicity and the magic that unfolds, is that you start calling in your people and all these connections kind of just start showing up. And you're just kind of one of those reminders on my own journey that, yeah, okay, it's like as you put yourself out there, your people find you, and these opportunities kind of evolve. And you give me a lot of courage too. Your courage to put yourself out there in the world of woo, right? Like I'm totally,
In the woo
peeking out of the
closet.
closet.
Hi.
Yeah, like all of my woo things are off camera right now, but they're surrounding me right
Yeah.
now. There's those pieces of it. So I just want to affirm and validate and thank you for just, being a courageous leader in that space of going, yeah, let's open space where we can have conversation, where we can call ourselves blue curious, where we can even explore what does that look like and mean and feel like. And it's powerful. So I really do admire you in that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for saying so. It was such a pleasure to chat. Thank you so, so much, Woo Crew, for tuning in to this episode. Next week, I will be back with another guest. And if you have any questions, comments, as always, come on over to @myluminouslife_ on Instagram. And if you like this week's episode, please go ahead and leave me a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this. I can't wait to see you next week. Bye for now.